Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Reimagining Your Compensation Strategy. I'm Allison DeFlorio, and I'm joined by Elena Van Kirk, one of my fantastic colleagues here at Exude Human Capital, to share with you some insights about a topic that we seem to eat and breathe in daily, certainly over the last several years, where we've seen some changes in how people are thinking about compensation. Before we get started today, I do want to share a couple of housekeeping tips. And just so you know, this session is being recorded, so your phones will be on mute, but your questions are important to us. So please feel free at any time during the session to enter your questions, and Elena and I will do our best to address them over the course of the hour so that we're with you today. If we're not able to address any questions, our contact information will be at the end of the presentation, and please feel free to reach out to either one of us. The other thing I'd like to share with you is that the information we're going to share with you today, we think is incredibly timely and really important. So when you do get a link of the recording will be sent out, please feel free to share that with colleagues who may not have been able to attend today, that you think would find this of value. And just thank you for taking time out of your day to spend some time with us reimagining your compensation strategy. So without further ado, I looked at the list. We have some people who've joined us for webinars before, and then some new names. So welcome back to those of you who have been with us before, and welcome to those who are new to Exude webinar series. Just so you know, we offer these webinars on a regular basis, and we do it to try to bring together our community of employers, our clients, and those who are interested in the topics around the areas that we support: human resources, diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership development. And when I think about today's topic, it really shows the convergence of the three practice areas in which we work. Certainly under the human resources component, we do quite a bit of compensation work. And Elaine and I both hope to share some stories with you today that will help support some of the tips that we have for you today. When we're doing compensation work, we're always doing it through the lens of inclusion and diversity and equity. And I think that in today's market in particular, and we'll share some data with you, that's something that all employers or anyone on the phone, any of your organizations that are thinking about compensation, really need to look through that lens as part of the process. And then the third component, leadership development as it relates to compensation. One of the things we'll share with you today is just the lack of knowledge of most hiring managers and managers in general about speaking about compensation. And not that they have to be experts, but to have an effective compensation structure in place, you really have to have your managers be able to speak to it to feel the full impact of that. So I hope to share some insights with you based on my lens, and I'd love to turn it over to my colleague, Elena Van Kirk, to share a little bit about her background.
Thank you so much, Allison. Good morning, everyone. Elena Van Kirk, principal with Exude. I have been with Exude for about 2 years, and I have over 10 years of experience in the HR industry. I've been a practitioner, and for the last number of years, been a consultant across really all areas of talent management and talent development, and really talent enablement, which I think is going to be the next phase of how we're looking at navigating both our economic and our talent markets. So we have a lot to share with you today. Very excited to be here with you all.
Great. Thanks, Elena. So just to kind of give you a picture of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about what is a compensation philosophy. Many of you may have them in place. Some of you may be revising them. Some of you may be at a different stage. But we want to talk about what it really means and why you have it in place. Why should you have a strategy, and what do you need to be thinking about in terms of developing a comp strategy? Rethinking total compensation. We've talked quite a bit about this on some previous webinars, but we can't emphasize enough that we're in a very different place from a talent market. And so being able to rethink total comp is important. We've had a lot of questions about inflation and market volatility. So we'll address some of the concerns there. Pay transparency. Some of you may be in states where laws have been enacted. Elena will talk to you about why that's important now. And then we'll leave you with some takeaway tips that hopefully you can share with those in your organizations as you think through your strategy. As we always like to do when we start these webinars is just to kind of create some context for where the marketplace is and as it relates to the topic of compensation. And many of you may have seen this way of reframing the talent market today, but now it's being called kind of the Great Realignment. And I think that's very appropriately named because the pandemic accelerated, as we know, some work that had been happening in the area of equal pay, pay equity, transparency. And then we had the Great Resignation, where we started to see the talent market tighten, and we're still in a tight talent market. Unemployment's at 3.5%. So let's think about what factors are impacting the reason behind why we have to think about our compensation strategy. So we have a couple of sources of recent studies that were completed in 2022. One of them shared that 44% of organizations do report that pay is the most significant reason they're losing talent. And when they say losing talent that they have, or not being able to pull talent over the finish line. And we see that quite a bit. We talk to employers every day that have a candidate that they really, really want, and they just can't seem to pull it over the finish line because somebody else is offering them something that they can't meet. Interestingly, we also know that 45% of employees report that they don't believe or are unsure that the company pays fairly. So think about that. That's almost 50% of employees are unsure. We spoke a little bit earlier about the importance of education and being able to communicate around pay practices and compensation. And we do think that that could address potentially some of that issue there. The other thing that we know is that 53% of employers report that they're fairly confident or confident in their total rewards package to attract and retain talent. So 50%, they're fairly confident or confident. That means that there are a lot of people out there that maybe haven't taken the step back to say, are we offering the right package to attract and retain talent? And then very importantly, in a recent study, 34% of US-based employers report that they expanded their DEI plan 2021 to include, of that 34%, 64% included equitable compensation strategy as part of that plan. And Elena, you just shared with me before we started a really interesting stat. Would you mind sharing that with regards to the percent of employees willing to take pay cuts? Or
Of course. So a recent study actually found that 30% of US respondents, it was a study from the US and the UK, over 30% of US respondents said that they would take a pay cut to help create equal pay across their organization. So not only is this a step that employers are taking in launching new DEI plans, but this is something that very significantly resonates across organizations all the way down through multiple employee levels.
Great. Thank you for that. And I have to say, we all know that employees, talent, candidates, applicants have access to pay information unlike ever before. Just a few clicks, they can access, whether it's Glassdoor or any of the pay scale or salary.com, and they can get a range. They may not necessarily be matching it apples to apples, but they do have more access to information than ever before. So all of that really leads us to a place where we need to be more focused, structured, or buttoned up when it comes to our comp strategies and philosophies. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Elena, to guide us through the next few slides.
Thanks, Allison. So we've been having this conversation more and more with clients about developing a compensation philosophy as really an overarching theme over the strategy and the programs and policies that they're putting into place. When we start to take a look at what is a compensation philosophy, we look at it as a way to communicate with employees about pay and clearly state what the organization is striving to do when it comes to compensation. So compensation philosophies typically span time. It's not just a policy that's set in place or a statement that we made today or just for fiscal year 2022. But they may be in place for 2 to 3 years as a commitment over a period of time to continue to make compensation a priority. They often cover areas like compliance by defining how jobs are classified under FLSA, but also address equity and fairness. So it may include language about how jobs are categorized by levels for pay purposes, or may specify percentage difference in pay between managers and subordinates. Some of those practices might be clearly stated in this compensation philosophy as a way to, again, create transparency around equity and fairness. What's included in a compensation philosophy is often tied to the organization's mission or the company's outlook. So this could be growth, this could be retention, but oftentimes really are tied back to what is that organization overall striving to do. So if we give some thought to, why do we need a compensation strategy? While a compensation philosophy documents what the organization is striving to achieve with regard to pay, a compensation strategy maps out how they plan to get there. Both philosophy and strategy should align with your organizational goals. If your organizational goal for this year is growth, this might mean you need to recruit and hire more staff. We've seen a lot of organizations getting out there and trying to bring in additional people and just getting people in the door in order to support their growth needs. And they're not going to meet those revenue goals without bodies here to move. But other organizations might be more dependent on partnerships or strategic relationships in order to have success and meet their goals. And oftentimes those relationships are managed by people. And we've all seen it where somebody who owns a key relationship leaves and the company is in jeopardy of losing that relationship or partnership as well. For those organizations, it might mean that employee retention is going to be a bigger driver of success. And so your strategy should be focused on incentivizing people to stay. We should be thinking, what do we need from our people to deliver on these goals? And we should also be considering, how can we find them? How can we reward them? How can they grow with us? We recently did work with a client where one of their organizational goals was to develop leaders for their communities. They fully expected that over time, their leaders would move on to lead in other organizations. But in order to achieve that goal, they needed to see their staff grow into leadership level roles. So part of their compensation strategy had to be built around development. In order to create a plan for meeting your goals, you may need to take a closer look at your internal structure. Not all organizations have multiple tiers for development, nor do all employees want to become leaders. It's important to create pathways for both career growth and salary growth, and they may not always look the same. So our approach to compensation really provides for salary growth through upward promotion, lateral movement, job expansion, and even for those employees who are comfortable in their current role. Even those steady eddies, right? We want to be able to keep them with the organization as long as possible as well. And so making sure that we have a really well-rounded and thought out compensation strategy specific to whatever our internal hierarchy looks like is really important. So our first tip today that we want to leave you with is to identify your goals and challenges and craft your strategy toward them.
Elena, when you think about the over the years, the work you've been doing in this space, how frequently do people, it's no longer a set it and forget it. You have a comp strategy. I mean, the market's just changed so much in the last 2 years as compared to the prior couple of decades. What do you recommend to people with regards to revisiting the strategy? I mean, I get that the longer term strategy is in place, but what have you seen change over the last couple of years, and what do you recommend to people in terms of thinking through their strategy and revisiting it?
Absolutely. That's a great question, Allison. So I think a little bit of it depends on the organization. The more that your organization goes through change, the more that your compensation philosophy and your strategy to achieving those changing goals should be looked at and revisited and possibly updated. Not every organization is going through ongoing change. Some organizations, have some relatively consistent years. And in that case, it's okay to leave a philosophy or a strategy in place for 2 or 3 years until there is another catalyst. Maybe we have new employees in who have different needs. Maybe the trajectory of the organization has has changed and there are new initiatives, or we're responding to other environmental or economic factors as we move about our day and our business. So I would say to really keep a pulse on what phase and the speed of change in your organization, and do a check-in 1 to 3 years as appropriate for your org.
Great. And I know one of the things that's come up in the engagements that that we've been working on too, that really impacts people's compensation strategy, is moving to hybrid and remote work with people now who, originally you would set your compensation strategy and then do all your market analysis around the area in which you had your headquarters or wherever you were. But now we've got employees all over the country potentially for some of our employers. And how has that impacted how people think about their comp strategies?
It's had a huge impact. So it leads organizations to really have to make some key decisions about that compensation strategy. Do we want to say our HQ is still in Philadelphia, New York, DC, and we're going to pay Philadelphia, New York, DC market salaries? Or is it going to be more of, we fully respect that we can hire anywhere, and so we need to be able to reflect each of those individual local markets? There are pluses and minuses to both. There's also, a significant difference in administrative burden in managing market pricing for multiple locations as opposed to one HQ city. Definitely something that should be part of the discussion around your compensation strategy.
Great. And I know some of our engagements have looked at geographical differentials too. So they're all different sorts of mechanisms that you can build into the process. And, pay, if I flash back to pre-pandemic, pay would always show up as one of the top 5 to 7 engagement factors. But I would often talk to employers saying, no, we don't really get people based on pay. It's not as important. It's really total compensation. And where total compensation, we agree, total compensation is really important. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Know that pay has risen in the key drivers, and it's now generally 1 or 2, with flexibility kind of taking that first or second place, depending on what you're looking for. But rethinking total compensation is something that we hope those of you on the phone are doing on an annual basis. We have so many demographics in the workplace today, all at different phases of their life, and all looking for different benefits to help round out a package that will make them stay with you or want to join your organization. And the better you are at kind of adjusting that and keeping that relevant to the employee base that you have, number 1, and number 2, quantifying the value of that, being able to share it with people, and number 3, making sure that you're constantly doing some internal marketing around the value of the total compensation package, so that should one of your a candidate or an employee be entertaining other options, that they know enough to ask about these types of this total comp package, so they're comparing apples to apples as closely as they can. Some of the things that we have seen take a big uptick in importance across the board over the last couple of years certainly is flexibility, time off practices. We have organizations, even pre-pandemic, that were moving to unlimited PTO, or moving away from traditional vacation sick to PTO to give people more flexibility in how they use their time. But flexibility in scheduling, flexibility, not just in hybrid and remote work, but during the course of the day when you work. If you have to take time to go do a doctor's visit during the day, or even get out and go to the gym or something. That's something that a few years ago we didn't see that level of flexibility as is being demanded today or required today. Mental health support also continues to be one of the drivers of total comp packages. And many of our employers have taken great strides to promote their employee resource tools or their benefits around mental health, providing mental health days, and living by example, where senior leaders will also take that time and be comfortable saying, I'm just taking a mental health day, leading by example so the rest of the population feels comfortable doing the same. We do see an uptick in education, and that can come in a number of different ways. That can be in payment for tuition reimbursement for courses. It can be for certifications, or simply in providing education, attending conferences to give more industry specific education. But you can see here that this is always, the different size bubbles kind of allude to the fact that depending on where you are in your life cycle as an employee, one or more of these may become more important in the total comp package. So we have to constantly revisit it. One of the things that we do recommend is when you get near your open enrollment every year, that you do survey your employees. You survey on the things that are to see what's most important to them. So when you craft a package, you can craft it knowing that you are meeting the needs of the population of the organization. Again, I'll go back to, no longer is it kind of a set it and forget it. There are always new things coming out there. We've seen Uber credits. We've seen pay lunches. I've got a few organizations that are in the engineering space, and talent crunch has really hit that space. It's really a war on talent in that particular space. And they will offer lunches every day. They'll pay for lunches to bring lunch into the organization. So not everybody on the call can afford to do that, but think about things that you may be able to do that will help you attract and retain. So survey your employees to learn what's most valuable to them, and as you evaluate your total rewards. And then we always recommend doing total compensation statements. Some of you may already do this, but it's very helpful for you to sit down with your employees once a year and share with them what the value of their total compensation package is. Depending on the tools that you have, some tools will be able to do that for you, some of your payroll tools, and that's something you should certainly ask your payroll provider about, because that just gives an at a glance and a reminder of what the total comp is. And wait, Elena, correct me if I'm wrong, but in general, we're saying that the value of the total comp package is generally somewhere between 25 to 35% of base salary. And I know in some of our government organizations, it's even higher than that. It's probably like 40, 41%.
Yes, it has definitely been going up over the past couple of years. And I will add, to your point, Allison, it is so important to survey your employees. We've heard stories of organizations who have even put in additional benefit plans, additional flexibility, policies that providing for, paid leave for when your children or your family members are sick. And if you're not surveying your employees and really understanding what's valuable to them, you risk putting something out there that doesn't quite hit the mark. So a lot of employees have shared that this is great that you have this paid family leave policy. However, I don't necessarily want to have to take a day off and walk away from work every single time, my kid gets sick, because that impacts my working relationships and the value that I feel in my contributions to my organization and my individual professional progress in meeting my goals. So some organizations have said, okay, we can maybe subsidize, backup childcare or elder care programs, which exist today, which is an incredible thing that there are companies out there that can administer that, so that you're not putting your employees in a position where they have to pick between work and family, right? Those who want to stay home can take the paid family leave, but those who want to work maybe have some other options. And so really understanding what's most valuable to them based on where they are in their life cycle, as well as their relationship as an employee and as a worker and a professional, is going to give you the information that you need to craft a total rewards package that really meets your needs and is highly competitive.
Great. Thank you. We had one question come in as to whether there is data or surveys that show that flexibility is in one of the top two, and the answer is yes. So one of the ones we cited earlier, and again, you'll be getting a link to this presentation, so you'll see I don't know if the link is there. We'll make sure we include it in our follow-up. But PayScale came out with a 22 compensation trends report. And they surveyed thousands of people. And then there's also another one by, I believe, Mercer that's going to show flexibility also within the top, possibly 2 or 3. So,
how to move forward.
Yeah, how to move forward. Now what? So what?
So I think the first step, if you're going to evaluate compensation, the absolute first step is to conduct a market study. You have to really understand where you are in comparison to your market or your markets. If you have employees in multiple geographical areas, or you compete across multiple industries. Some of your jobs may be paid currently above market, others may be below. Without the data, we just don't know. And it's not uncommon for us to find, when we do this work with clients, it's not uncommon for us to find that our clients are generally paying market rates for the majority of their roles, and their current compensation can be considered competitive without major adjustments. It's also really important to determine where your salaries should be in comparison to market, specific to your organization's needs and capabilities. Many employers target the 50th percentile of the market, but that might not be reasonable for everyone. Profitable, well-funded organizations may strive to pay up to the 75th percentile, while organizations that are lacking funding or maybe coming off of a poor year may need to target the 25th percentile for all roles. And at the same time, it's not uncommon for organizations to target a higher percentile for highly competitive roles that are really difficult to recruit for, where they're targeting a more moderate percentile for all other roles. But a market analysis will give you all of the information necessary to make these informed decisions.
And I think it's interesting too, having watched you work through some of these engagements and seeing where salaries fall at the end of the day, using that data to be able to factor in strategies. If there are outliers, if there are people who or groups or positions that are below the market, how to strategize to get them closer to the market. Do you want to speak a little bit about that, Elena?
Absolutely. That comes up a lot. And so some organizations, I think, shy away from conducting a market study because their biggest fear is that it's going to indicate that they pay significantly below market, and they say we can't afford to make those adjustments. And I would challenge that reasoning for a couple of reasons. First is that you just don't know. And actually, more often than not, I'd say our clients end up being closer to the market than they think they are. And secondly, there are so many ways to be able to account for those adjustments, even if you are paying under market. Not everything needs to be done at once. It can be a multi-year plan in order to bring those salaries up. It doesn't need to be all adjusted in base. Some of it can be through career development opportunities. Some can be step increases per quarter in order to get closer to a target. And for a lot of these organizations, we also give them the flexibility by creating a pay structure and by creating ranges that they don't have to pay the market rate. They can pay within a market-based range for positions of similar responsibility and level in the organization. So there are lots of strategies to manage that, but having the information is going to be key to making decisions and putting a plan in place moving forward.
Yeah, and I would also add to that, and I know we're going to address it in a few minutes, but being able to have that data, that well-validated data that you can speak to when your candidate or your employees do come to you and say, well, I found that the salary for someone in my position, in my role, is actually this. how are you justifying your salaries, and to be able to speak with confidence that you have gone to the market, whatever that regular cadence is. Is it every 3 years? Is it 2 years? We used to say every 3 years, but with the movement in the market, you have to look at it more frequently than that. But being able to speak to the well-validated sources that you're using is really important in the spirit of transparency in today's market.
Absolutely. And so I think to address that concern over the market, I think it's really important to understand that paying competitively is a moving target. So, this is across all industries. Salary increases over the past couple of years have not kept pace with inflation. So the average salary increase across all industries for 2021 was 2.8%. That went up in 2022 to an average of 3.4%. But the consumer price index, which many organizations and research institutions use as an indication of the level of inflation, is almost at 8%. But both of these markets are moving. The talent market and the economy are both constantly moving. And so while there is a concern from, of course, many employees that salary increases are not keeping up with inflation, it is important to remind them that they are two different things. So first, inflation and salary increases reflect two different markets, the economy and the labor market, where the economy is based on, a cost of goods. The labor market is entirely dependent on competition for labor, and the two do not have necessarily a direct correlation. Secondly, the consumer price index will eventually go down, but organizations don't typically reduce salaries when the economy rebounds. So it's completely natural that the pace of salary increases is going to be slower and slightly more stable than inflation and then the economy, because while the economy moves in two directions, salary increases typically only move in one. What we oftentimes see happen is that once the economy does rebound, instead of salaries going down, salaries just tend to grow at a slower pace moving forward to bring those numbers a little bit closer together. But since we can't predict what will happen with either the economy or the labor market, we can instead communicate how we plan to strive to pay competitively despite changing conditions. And some things to consider are committing to paying or striving toward paying at a certain percentile of market, committing to reevaluating how your salaries compare to the market every year or every 3 years, or commit to creating clear paths for salary growth through career development. So that's another important piece, is that we look at salary increases on an annual basis as being that performance merit increase, or maybe you just do a blanket across the board, everybody gets 2.5% to 4%. Showing employees how they can achieve salary growth outside of just annual salary increases is also a really important opportunity to be able to show how you are going to continue to help them navigate their salary growth.
Great. We do have a couple of questions here, Elena. Some of them, I think we covered. The CPI is the Consumer Price Index. A couple of questions around resources, best resources to conduct a market study, salary data. I know at Exude, when we do compensation work, we have two databases that we will generally use, ERI, or Economic Research Institute, which we find to be very well validated information, and pay factors, which draws from a number of different salary surveys. We also will work with some of our nonprofit organizations. It used to be GuideStar, but I now believe it's Candid. And those of you on the call who are from nonprofit organizations know that will give you just the top 5 highest salaries in an organization, but that can be helpful data for people. It is also lagging data, so generally it could be a year or two behind depending on when that information is posted. I'd also suggest, and chime in here, Elena, some of our organizations have industry-specific surveys that they participate in. One recommendation we would have is when you get that invitation to participate in a salary survey, we know they're not fun and they take time to respond, but you generally, if you participate in one, you will have access to that data. And in some of the comp work we do that's very specific, like let's say to education or whatever industry, if they participate in a survey and share that data, we can also look at that data in addition to looking at the other data sources we have. Is there anything you would add, Elena, in terms of data sources?
I would. So one thing that's really important that I think sometimes tends to get overlooked is that not all survey data is created equal. So it's important to understand the validity of the survey data, how relevant it is to your industry, how representative it is of your jobs, how frequently it is updated, or that you are aging the data if it is not current data. There's quite a bit that can go into it. And so when our approach is typically we use 2 to 3 very well reputed sources, but it's also not uncommon for us to be able to pull in, and we would weight industry specific or competitor specific data as part of a client study. We would weight that a little bit heavier than maybe some of our more general sources. So not all survey data is equal, but it's really important to find well-reputed, well-researched, current data that closely aligns with the jobs that you are doing an analysis on.
Great. And there's one other question here, Elena, around the education industry average. Do we think it's higher or lower than the 3.4%?
That's a great question. There's been a lot of shift in the education industry, and I would hate to just give, a blanket answer to that. I think there's definitely a difference between public and private. I know that some districts in some areas have had to lower even their standards for bringing in qualified teachers, just because there's such a competition for talent and there's such a need, and not necessarily the labor on the market, where I think, private institutions have more funds to be able to pay more competitively. So that's a little bit of a bigger question, but definitely something that we could help you navigate and have access to information to be able to help validate, whatever the core concern is based on where your organization is in the education industry.
Great. And the last question there is just the average salary increases. Are they for the calendar year 2022 or fiscal year? And I'm thinking calendar year for 2022. So thank you for your questions, everyone. We appreciate that. Keep them coming. So just to wrap this up, make the commitment. Tip number 3: make a commitment and put it in writing. It'll help you as you think through this next piece: pay transparency. Take it away, Elena.
Yes. So I think, again, putting it in writing is so important. And sharing that information with employees, making that commitment, making them aware of your commitment is one step in itself to implementing and increasing transparency. So pay transparency has really become a common theme. It's made its way through legislation. 17 states currently have pay transparency laws. Not all of them are state laws, but it's even happening at local jurisdiction level. 17 states do currently have pay transparency laws. Many of them are in place. The remainder of them are set to go into effect in early 2023. So definitely something to look into, especially if you are a multi-jurisdictional employer. And those pay transparency laws really range from anything as simple as providing a salary range upon request from an interviewee, really to publicly posting and automatically disclosing the salary range, both internally and externally, for every hire, promotion, or transfer opportunity. So some of them are extremely detailed and robust, while others are not so much. So understanding where you are and what applies to you is going to be important. Transparency requires consistency in how compensation decisions are made. It would be really difficult to provide transparency when pay decisions are at the complete discretion of one executive or each independent leader across an organization. And transparency works best when there is structure or a framework, at least, from which all compensation decisions are at least based off of. Structure and consistency help ensure that pay decisions are fair and equitable, which is why pay transparency became an initiative in the first place to help minimize both gender and racial wealth gaps across the US. And there are many levels to pay transparency. It covers, more than just listing a salary range on a job posting, but doesn't mean that every employee's salary within an organization is public knowledge, which I think is what some organizations fear when they hear pay transparency. Mm-hmm. So a good place to start is to understand where you are on the spectrum and decide where you want to go as an organization or where you will need to go in order to comply with the law. So Allison, if you will advance the slide. Mm-hmm. This is our sample pay transparency spectrum. Again, just an example, and you can see it ranges from, no transparency, limited transparency, all the way to ultimate transparency. Many organizations that we work with fall on the left-hand side. They may have some policies or procedures. They may have created their own pay structure, but this information might only be used by executive, finance, or HR leaders. And as organizations move more toward the middle of the spectrum, they start to communicate to employees about evaluating compensation and often take an informed approach by conducting a market analysis and using that validated data to build pay structures, policies, and implement new practices. From here, each step is communicated to employees, and employees might even understand what is that criteria for how pay decisions are made. Ultimate transparency, all the way over on the right, is not common, nor is it the expectation, and it is not a milestone that many organizations will need to achieve. Its importance on this spectrum is not that employees know all salaries across the organization in this stage, but more so that they know why salaries are what they are throughout the organization. The ultimate transparency truly reflects that we have a structure, we have framework, it's based on well-validated benchmarks. Here is our commitment. Here is where we stand in delivering on our commitment to you. So it's really just that transparency that employees understand why those decisions are made and how those decisions are made, that they can have trust in the fact that all of the compensation, not only is it may be competitive, but also is fair and equitable across the organization. So I think it's most important to take time to understand where you are on the spectrum and what actions you can take as an organization to move yourself forward, even if it's just one phase. And to this end, our fourth tip is to plan specific steps to increase transparency wherever possible.
And one of the things that I've noticed, particularly over the last couple of years, and we've been doing market studies and compensation work for over a decade. And Elena, I've noticed that when we're doing market studies, more organizations, not all organizations, but more organizations are pulling in stakeholders that represent different levels of the organization. So when you think about pay transparency of the process, how does that impact transparency when you have multiple stakeholders involved, not necessarily in the decision making, but in the process of perhaps mapping jobs or how the process is actually managed?
It makes a huge difference, and it really speaks to trust. So you're absolutely right that where I think our market analysis projects used to primarily be with just those key stakeholders, and now when we're doing the job evaluation, we're matching jobs in order to pull the benchmark data for that specific job. We're doing a series of reviews with downstream managers and leaders so that they have input and they can say, yes, these benchmark jobs reflect the work my team does. Yes, I would weight these matches correct. Yes, I understand the direction that we're going in how we're matching a job, an internal job to a market job. And that creates such validation so that then when we come back with that data and we say, here is how competitive you are, here is how you are paying for each position in comparison to market, not only do those managers understand how we came to that data and where that came from, but they can say to their employees at the end of the day, yes, I validated this. This is an accurate representation of the work that you do and the span of control and the scope of responsibility and the years of experience, all of that. And that validation from the top level all the way down to the bottom level increases trust and increases transparency throughout the process.
Yeah, and I think that trust is really where is one of the huge benefits of this exercise, right? Is building trust in transparency.
So, in talking about consistency of message, I think it's really important, to Allison's point, to bring in your leaders. We cannot have pay transparency without consistency. And it's not just consistency in how we make decisions or using the framework, but it's also consistency of message. And that message should be reinforced from the top down. Managers should be trained and educated about what went into the structure and the framework that exists, how it is to be used and to be administered, guidelines on where they have flexibility to make their own decisions, but guidance on how to make those decisions, again, fair and equitable and consistent with their practice. And they should be accountable to leading conversations about pay. The more that message is the same through every level of the organization is where we get validity and trust and confidence from your employees in those pay decisions. And then they become positive pay decisions and positive pay communications. And so the more that, we hide behind lack of involvement or, I'm not really sure, this is just what I was told to tell you you're going to be paid now. The more that it's veiled information is when we get distrust. So we always want to lead with informed information, and every level of the organization having accountability to share that same message.
Great. And I think it really adds to the confidence of, the training that we're going to talk about in just a moment, but managers need to feel confident about speaking about pay. Doesn't mean that they have to be experts, but they have to feel confident about the process and be able to speak to the process that was taken. We did have a question that came through about will we share the slide that had the pay transparency scale. A link to this whole recording will be coming out, so you'll have access to that. The answer is yes. So just to kind of recap where we've been here, we want to leave you with these 5 tips that we shared along the way, but identifying your talent goals or challenges and making sure that you're structuring your compensation strategy philosophy to support those goals or address the challenges that you're having. Remember, when it comes to total compensation, that simple tool of surveying your people to find out, get the pulse. Again, you may have, depending on the systems you're using, the capability of pushing out surveys to gather that information, or you can use a different survey tool. But it's really important to ask them what's most important before you make decisions around what you're going to include. Make that commitment and put it in writing. Have something that you're going to stick to and revisit and commit to adjusting as Elena talked about, with all the moving targets that are impacting our compensation strategies. Take the steps to increase transparency, and you can do that wherever you are in this journey, if you will. If you're starting with a market analysis, think about the team that will be included in that process. If you are farther along in the process, what can you do to make sure people have access to the information about how you came about that, train those managers, increase the transparency. And lastly is that informing and empowering managers to be able to talk about pay. Again, they don't need to be experts, but one of the things we've always done with our compensation studies is include an informational session upon the conclusion of the study to share the findings with and the recommendations with managers, so they can speak to the ranges that were developed and why why we chose the midpoint, why the organization chose the midpoint that they did, what it's based on, and what that means. Because most people, when they see a range, they think they want to be at the top of the range, but why is it structured this way? So that we can continue to recognize and reward talent in that role. So 5 really important steps here. Elena, anything you want to add to those tips?
I think just on that last one, if you think about it, empowering managers to be able to talk about pay also empowers managers to be able to talk about development. They go hand in hand. And so as we look at compensation strategy and structure, while it's so important to have, a pay structure, oftentimes it's a set of ranges. And to your point, Allison, understanding where an employee should be in that range based on criteria, it's also important to empower them to understand, what sets an employee, what is the criteria for each job at each level of the organization. And that's oftentimes the basis for pay conversations. And that becomes then the basis for development conversations. And so I think it's clearly an area that many organizations are looking to improve in, and this can be a really easy step into that pool.
Great. And we have another question, and this actually just came up on a call, I believe, recently that we were on. In the interest of transparency, clarity, and also deeper DEI efforts, how have you seen organizations wrestle effectively in reviewing and revising pay ranges related to formal education degrees, industry credentials, and work experience?
Such a great question. We are having this conversation constantly. So what I will say is that one of the important things, and one step that a lot of the organizations we've worked with, what's helped in this regard is to have documented criteria for how is a job classified as a specialist, a manager, a senior manager, a director, etc. And in doing that, that allows us to create consistency in the criteria, in the qualifications based on the scope and span of responsibility at each level. So taking a DEI lens on that, what a lot of our organizations are leaning toward is many organizations are moving away from degree requirements unless they truly have a place at higher level of the organization where we're talking secondary degrees, right? Advanced degrees being required, or in highly specialized roles where advanced degrees are required. It's really the only place that we're seeing them moving forward. That said, when an organization does want to have consistency in putting degree requirements out there, we're moving away from the word preferred, because preferred still indicates that there is preferential treatment going to a candidate having a degree as opposed to a candidate without a degree. So instead, we're using language that specifies the exact, number of years of experience or the exact type of experience that you would think is equitable to a degree. And the more clarity that you can create around that really enables and empowers those individuals to still apply for that position, because you're opening that door. You're clearly stating, this is our playing field, and it can look like A, B, or C, but they're all the same. So we're doing a lot of work around this, and a lot of that really stems from grade criteria. And then the secondary evolution of that is for it to transfer to job postings and job descriptions.
Great question. Thank you for asking that. So that leads us to the end here, and we hope that this was of value to all of you. We welcome any additional questions that you may have, and certainly if you think of questions after this session, our contact information is here, and both Elaine and I would love to speak with you. We will be, just as a reminder, sending out a copy of the recording to this, so please feel free to share with colleagues or those that you think may find it of value. And I want to thank my partner here in crime, Elena, for taking the time to work with me on this, and to thank all of you for taking time out of your day to join us for the conversation.
So much.
Great. Hope to see you on another webinar soon, everyone. Have a great day.